Yes, indeed. Okay, we are live yet again here on the Hoplite channel. I, of course, as always, am your host, Hop. And you clicked on this video because you came to see Norse Lit, the Saga of King Hrolf Kraki, Part 4. This will be the conclusion of the Saga of King Hrolf Kraki. For everybody who came to see Parts 1, 2, and 3, thanks a lot. That's very cool. I hope you've enjoyed the series watching as much as I've enjoyed reading it to you. If you haven't watched any of the parts previously, I recommend you go back and watch 1 through 3 before watching this, because it will seem a bit out of sequence, obviously. But nevertheless, we're here for Part 4. And yeah, this video will probably be the shortest of all the parts. I could have tacked this on to Part 3, but Part 3 would have been over an hour and a half, and that's quite a long video. So I figured I would chop off the end of Part 3 to conclude the saga with Part 4. So here we are. All right, let's talk about the chapters we'll cover in this segment for the conclusion. Number 1, we have Queen Skuld incites King Hjorvard. Number 2, we have Queen Skuld attacks King Hrolf at the Yule. Third, we have the Great Battle. And lastly, of course, we have the death of King Hrolf Kraki. Before we jump into this reading, however, I think we should have a little bit of a backstory as far as Queen Skuld is concerned. I did not read every single chapter in this video series simply because it would have been like 10 parts and very hard to follow. So I just took the most, I guess, what you would say, the crucial chapters to follow the saga, and spliced together 4 parts that were most enjoyable. I definitely recommend reading the whole saga itself. It's quite a good read. Yeah, if you watch this video, you'll get the gist of the saga of Hrolf Kraki. But a chapter I did skip over was the nature of Queen Skuld and King Hjorvard. So as we remember from the first part of the series, we talked about King Helgi. King Helgi is the father of King Hrolf, and he's also the father of King Hrolf's mother, Queen Yrsa. Right. So there's that whole sordid mess with Helgi marrying his daughter and having a child by her. Right. We won't get into that for this part. That's been covered. But Queen Skuld is actually Hrolf's sister, although not by the same mother. So as we know, Queen Yrsa is the daughter of King Helgi, who is now dead, and Hrolf is the son of Queen Yrsa. Queen Skuld is also the daughter of King Helgi, although there was a chapter where King Helgi is visited by this old woman. And this old woman is freezing and asks for refuge with King Helgi, and he grants it to her. And she actually asks to share a bed with him just for warmth. King Helgi agrees to this, but wasn't a fan of it, but felt it, was, I guess, the honorable thing to do was let this old woman freeze. When they wake in the morning, he sees a beautiful woman lying next to him, and this is the elven woman. And she thanks him because by letting her sleep in his bed, he was able to lift a curse off of her. Now, Helgi, being the alpha dude he is, says, "Oh, well, great, now that you're beautiful, we should get married." She didn't want to necessarily do this, but they agree to get married, lickety-split. And what do you know, Helgi hooks up with this elven woman, and she tells him that she has to leave and that she is carrying his child, and that if he does not do honorable, or if he does not honorably raise his daughter and grant, and I think he has to fulfill several different criteria to honorably raise this daughter. And of course, Helgi screws it up somehow. He maybe does 1 or 2 things for the daughter, but not the third. So the elven woman returns later and leaves the daughter on Helgi's doorstep and says, "This is your daughter. And because you lifted the curse, you will derive some benefit, but this daughter will be a bane on your heirs." So The elven woman rewards Helgi by, I guess, breaking his sadness that he lost Yrsa, but she gives him a ill omen that this daughter will bring a curse to the family later. This is Skuld. Skuld grows up with King Hrolf. She is married to a nobleman named King Hjorvard. Hrolf actually tricks Hjorvard. There's another chapter where Hjorvard and Skuld and Hrolf's company are at his fortress, and Hrolf tricks him in this manner. He unfastens his war belt and hands Hjorvard his sword to hold for him as he does. Hjorvard thinks nothing of it, holds his sword for him, and as Hrolf fastens his belt and retakes his sword, he says, "You know the old adage, right? If a man undoes his belt and another man holds his sword, that man is signifying that he is the lesser of the two. Therefore, you will be a king beneath my kingship." And I guess this was the rule. Hjorvard said, all right, I guess you got me on that one. I guess I'll be the king beneath you because I held your sword for a few seconds. But this is what angers Hjorvard and Skuld, because Skuld now thinks that her husband has been slighted, and by extension, she has been slighted by her brother Hrolf. So let's pick up with Queen Skuld incites King Hjorvard, and before we do that, let's pour some mead, right? Got this slightly chilled mead. Don't know how the Vikings would have preferred their mead. I like mine slightly chilled, but I guess back in those days, they didn't really have refrigeration yet. So you just kind of took what you got. All right, let's go. Let's do it. We jump to page 69. All right, no joking there. And it begins. A long time passed during which King Hrolf and his champions stayed peacefully in Denmark, and no one attacked them. All Hrolf's subject kings remained obedient. They paid him their tribute, as did Hjorvard, his brother-in-law. It happened that Queen Skuld spoke with her husband, King Hjorvard. Sighing heavily, she said, "It suits me little that we should pay tribute to King Hrolf and be forced to be his underlings. You must not remain his subject." Hjorvard answered, "It suits us best to suffer this indignity, as the others do, and to let everything remain quiet." "What a weakling you are," she said, "to accept whatever shame is handed to you." He replied, "It is not possible to challenge King Hrolf, and no one dares raise a shield against him." "In this respect, you are all so cowardly," she said. "There is no spirit in any of you, and so too it will remain for those who take no risks. How will we know whether King Hrolf and his champions can be hurt unless they are put to the test? The times are changing," she said, "and I believe King Hrolf is a man without hope of victory. To my mind, it does not seem outlandish to test if his assumption is true. Even if he is my kinsman, I will not spare him. He himself suspects that he will not gain the victory. It is for this reason he remains continually at home. I will now prepare a plan, one that might work, and I will spare no trouble in finding the proper way to force a showdown between us." Skuld was a powerful sorceress. She came from elfin stock on her mother's side, and for this fact King Hrolf and his champions would pay. "First, I will send men to King Hrolf, asking him to relieve me of paying the tribute for the next 3 years. Instead, I will offer to pay him everything at once according to his rights. I think this ruse will work, and if he accepts the idea, we will do nothing further." Messengers now went between them, doing as the queen wished. When asked, King Hrolf agreed to the request concerning the tribute. Time had passed. Okay. So, right, we get Queen Skuld here, and I guess, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, eh? Including your sister. Maybe especially your sister. So Queen Skuld is like, "I don't like the fact that you and I are King Hrolf's underlings. And you should be more ambitious, right? You're supposed to be my husband here. Why don't you get off your ass and do something? Why don't you be a man for once?" King Hjorvard is just like, "Hey, honey, we got life pretty good. King Hrolf doesn't really mistreat us. Yeah, we got to send him some cash every so often, but so does everybody else. Why don't we just let things remain quiet?" And of course, she goads him, saying, "You're a weakling. I always thought you were a weakling. You have no ambition. And how are we going to know if King Hrolf can be brought down or not unless somebody tests him and his men?" And Hjorvard is again just kind of probably wishing his wife would let it go. but she doesn't want to let it go. And she's a sorceress. So she's got an idea now that she's going to pull a ruse on Hrolf and tell him, well, you know what? How about you give us a stay on the 3 years of tribute we owe you, Hjorvard and I, and we'll give you all the tribute for those 3 years up front. And Hrolf, I guess, falls for this ruse because it doesn't really seem like a ruse. It's just like, you want to pay for 3 years in advance? Okay, fine, whatever. So this is what she does. And as it mentions there, she's of elfin stock. And in the Norse mythology, there were two types of elves. There were the light elves and the dark elves. The light elves, if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings, you know, it's kind of like Legolas and that race of elves. And then the dark elves, some people say were actually the dwarves, like the Gimli folks. So I don't know. Maybe in the Tolkien mythology, the elves, the light elves, were the ones that were conjurers and sorcerers, and the dwarves, you know, they were just good with, you know, axes, hammers, and, you know, metalwork. But the dark elves possibly had the ability to cast spells and magic, just as the light elves did. So it doesn't really say whether she's a light elf or a dark elf, just that she comes from elven stock and has this ability to cast spells and magic. Similar to Queen Hjorvard too, because we know from the previous reading, Queen Hjorvard, when she was refused by Bjorn, hit him with wolfskin gloves, and he took on the form of a cave bear during the day. And this was his curse that ended up killing him. Okay, let's move on to Queen Skuld attacks King Hrolf at Yule. And this is on page 70. It says, meanwhile, Skuld assembled a troop of the best fighters, as well as the worst rabble from neighboring provinces. This treachery was concealed so that King Hrolf was completely unaware of it. Likewise, the champions suspected nothing, because it was done with most skillful magic and sorcery. Skuld, to overpower her brother King Hrolf, fashioned a spell of high potency, which summoned elves, Norns, and countless other vile creatures. No human power could withstand so strong a force. Meanwhile, King Hrolf and his champions were happily reveling and amusing themselves in Hleidargard. With skill and courtesy, they took part in all the games known to each man. Each of them had a mistress for his pleasure. And now there is more to be told. When Hjorvard's and Skuld's forces were fully prepared, they set out for Hleidargard, arriving in unaccountable numbers just at the Yule. King Hrolf had commanded lavish preparations for the feast, and his men sat drinking heavily that Yule evening. Outside the stronghold, Hjorvard and Skuld pitched their tents, which were large and long and strangely outfitted. There were many wagons, all filled with weapons and armor. King Hrolf paid no attention to the new arrivals. His thoughts were more of generosity, magnificence, and courage. He dwelt on the valor that lay in his heart, pondering how to provide for all his guests in a way that would allow his fame to travel farthest. He already had everything that might enhance the honor of a worldly king. It is not mentioned that King Hrolf and his champions worshipped the old gods at any time. Rather, they put their trust in their own might and main. The holy faith at the time had not been proclaimed here in the northern lands, and for this reason, those who lived in the north had little knowledge of their creator. Next there is this to tell. Hjalti the magnanimous went to the house of his mistress. It was then that he saw clearly that peace was not being prepared in the streets and the tents of Hjorvard and Skuld. When Hjalti raised the alarm, his expression showed no concern. He lay now with his mistress. She was the fairest of women. After he had been there for a while, he sprang to his feet and said, "Which do you think better, 2 20-year-olds or 1 80-year-old man?" She answered, "I think 2 22-year-olds are better than a man of 80. "You will pay for these words, you whore," said Hjalti, and he went up to her and bit off her nose. "You can blame me if anyone fights over you, but I expect from now on most will think you scarcely a treasure." "You treat me miserably," she said, "and it is undeserved." "Everyone," said Hjalti, "can be fooled by scheming." Hjalti then reached for his weapons because he saw that the area around the stronghold was packed with men in armor, and that war standards had been raised. Realizing that battle was at hand, he made his way to the hall where King Hrolf sat with his champions. "Wake up, my lord king," said Hjalti. "War has come into our courtyard. The need is more for fighting now than for fondling women. The gold in the hall will, I think, be little increased by the tribute from your sister Skuld. She has the fiercest of Skildungs, and I can tell you that it is no small army, with swords drawn and other weapons ready, which circles the fortress. King Hjorvard has not come on a friendly errand, nor has he any intention from now on of seeking your permission to rule his own kingdom. Now is the time, said Hjalti, for us to lead the forces of our king, the man who denies us nothing. Let us fulfill our solemn vows that we will defend the king who has become the most famous in all the northern lands. Let it be heard in every land how we repay him for the weapons, armor, and many other generous acts, because what faces us will not be a minor undertaking. We have for a long time, despite many clear indications, ignored what was coming. Now I have reason to suspect that momentous events of the type that will not long be forgotten are about to take place. Some might say that I perhaps speak from fear, but it may be that King Hrolf drinks for the last time with his champions and retainers. Rise now, all you champions, said Hjalti, and be quick about parting from your mistresses. Other matters are staring you in the face. Prepare yourselves for what is about to happen. Up, all you champions, everyone must arm himself at once. Then Hrolmund the Hard leapt up, followed by Hrolf the Swift-handed, Svipdag and Beygad, and Hvitserk the Bold. Haklang was the sixth, Hardafil the seventh, Haki the Valiant the eighth, Vought the Arrogant the ninth, and Srotolf was the name of the 10th. Hjalti the Magnanimous was the 11th, and Bodvar Bjarki was the 12th. Bodvar was so named because he drove out King Hrolf's bullying and unjust berserkers. Some he killed, and none of them was successful against him. In comparison to him, the berserkers, when put to the test, were like children. Nevertheless, they always considered themselves superior, and they continually plotted against Bodvar. Bodvar Bjarki immediately stood up. He put on his war gear and said that King Hrolf now badly needed brave men. Heart and courage will be required of all of you who choose to stand alongside King Hrolf, rather than hide behind him. Then King Hrolf sprang to his feet. Showing now a trace of fear, he began to speak. Let us now draw down the finest strength that can be had. We do it before the battle, making us cheerful. In that way we show what manner of men Hrolf's champions are. Let us strive only to make our bravery so superior that it will never be forgotten, because gathered here are the finest and most courageous champions from all the surrounding lands. Tell Hjorvard and Skuld and their men that we will drink to our satisfaction before setting out to take the tribute. The king's orders were obeyed. Skuld answered, King Hrolf, my brother, is unlike all others, and the loss of such men is a dreadful misfortune. Nevertheless, all now moves towards the same end. So highly was King Hrolf regarded that he was praised by both friends and enemies. All right. It's getting on. All right. Things are coming to a head. So Queen Skuld, she brings Hjorvard along for the ride. They assemble all these troops, and she has the ability to summon elves, Norns, and other countless vile creatures. And the Norns were like the fates. In Norse mythology, the Norns decided the lifespan of all men. And just like the fates, would spin your yarn, and the yarn was your story in Greek mythology. And the yarn, when it was cut by the fates, that was your lifespan. All right? They decided how long it would be, how long it would go, what color it would take, and then when it was cut, it was over. So apparently Skuld has the power to summon fate itself, the Norns, and other vile creatures that are not named. So, they're in the hall, Hrolf and his men, they're making merry. It's Christmas time, right? Everyone's got their Christmas sweater on. There's a roaring fire. They're probably making popcorn necklaces and swilling beer and, carving up that fruit cake. Although it says here, and they actually make direct note of it, that they did not worship the old gods at this time, that it's believed, but they worshiped their own might and valor. And they did not know yet in these northern lands the nature of their creator, which would be the monotheistic God of Christianity. Because as we know, this saga was written well after Christianity had made its way into Scandinavia. But so Hjorvard and Skuld, they pitch camp outside of the fortress. I guess the scouts didn't see it. Maybe they just saw this massive force coming and they figured, there's just people out there. Whatever. I guess they're good to stay out there, even though it looks like they're ready for war. And then Hjalti, for some reason, is bedding down with his lady friend, and he asks her, which do you think are better, two 22-year-olds or one 80-year-old man? And the young lady says, well, two 22-year-olds. And Hjalti decides to bite her nose off because that pissed him off. I guess that answer. So I don't know I have no, for the life of me, I read that. I'm like, what does that mean? Like, okay, so she prefers 2 younger men versus 1 old man. Maybe that's to signify that she has no respect for a man who makes it into old age after surviving life. That's enough to get you a nose bitten off. I don't know. Anyway, that's what Hjalti does. But Hjalti the magnanimous, not so magnanimous there, right? He raises the alarm. He rallies the troops. And I guess by this point, the berserkers had been booted out. Bodvar, Bjarki had enough of them. And now you had the 12 champions of Hrolf. They're making ready for war. Hrolf finally comes to his senses, I guess, and says, all right, I guess this is it. This is going to be a big fight. Everybody is, pep talking each other. And Hrolf tells the messenger to go out and tell the invading army that, we'll receive your tribute whenever you're ready. So he's basically baiting them and goading them too. So let's move on to the great battle. This is on page 73. After drinking for a while, King Hrolf leapt up from the high seat, and all his champions followed his example. They left the pleasing drink and immediately went outside. Everyone, that is, except Bodvar Bjarki. He was nowhere to be seen, a fact that greatly perplexed the others. They thought it possible that Bodvar had been captured or killed. As soon as they went outside, a furious battle began. King Hrolf pushed forward with his standard. He was accompanied on both sides by his champions and by all men of the stronghold. These latter were not few in number, even if they did not count for much in battle. Much was to be seen. Massive blows struck helmets and mail coats with swords and spears flashed in the air. So numerous were the corpses that the ground was entirely covered. Hjalti the magnanimous said, "Many mail coats are now slit open and many weapons are broken. Helmets are smashed and brave knights are thrown from their mounts. Our king is in fine humor, for now he is as cheerful as when drinking deepest of his ale. He strikes alike with both hands, and in battle he is unlike other kings. To me he seems to have the strength of 12 men. So many brave men has he killed. Now King Hjorvard can see that the sword Skofnung cuts. It rings loudly within their skulls. The nature of Skofnung was such that it sang loud when it struck bone. The battle now became so fierce that nothing could withstand King Hrolf and his champions. Skofnung in hand, King Hrolf fought in a way that seemed a marvel. His courage made a great impression on King Hjorvard's army, whose men fell in heaps. Hjorvard and his men saw a great bear advancing in front of King Hrolf's troop. The bear was always besides the king, and it killed more men with its paw than any 5 of King Hrolf's champions did. Blows and missiles glanced off the animal as it used its weight to crush King Hjorvard's men and their horses. Between its teeth it tore everything within reach, causing a palpable fear to spread through the ranks of King Hjorvard's army. Hjalti looked around for his companion Bodvar, but did not see him. He said to King Hrolf, "What does it mean when Bodvar looks to his own safety and does not stand beside the king? We thought him such a champion, which indeed he was often proved himself to be." King Hrolf answered, Bodvar will be where he serves us best, if it is he who decides. Look to your own pride and prowess and do not reproach him, because not one of you is his equal. I do not hold this disparity against any of you, because you are all the most courageous of champions. Hjalti now ran back to the king's chamber, where he found Bodvar sitting idly. Hjalti spoke, "How long shall we wait for this most famous of men? It is a major disgrace that you are not on your feet. You should be testing the strength of your arms, which are as strong as a bear's. Get up now, Bodvar Bjarki, my master, otherwise I will burn down the house and you in it. There is dishonor in this conduct for such a champion as you. While the king endangers his life for us, you lose the renown that you had enjoyed so long." Then Bodvar stood up. He sighed deeply and said, "You need not try to frighten me, Hjalti, because I have not yet begun to be afraid. But now I am quite prepared to go. When I was young, I fled from neither fire nor steel. Fire have I seldom tested, although the passage of steel weapons is something that I have endured. Until now, I have survived both. You can in truth say that I wish to fight at my utmost level. King Hrolf has always called me a champion in front of his men. I have also many other things to repay. First, there is our bond by marriage and the 12 estates that he gave me, and then there are the many valuable gifts. I killed the berserker Agnar, a man of no lesser rank than that of a king, and that deed is well remembered." Bodvar now recounted for Hjalti many of his remarkable feats, noting that he had killed many men. He asked Hjalti, therefore, to recognize that he went into battle without fear, adding, "Although I think that in this current battle we are grappling with something far stranger than either of us ever experienced. But you, Hjalti, by disturbing me here, have not been as helpful to the king as you think you have. It was nearly decided which side had gained the victory. You have acted more out of ignorance than out of enmity to the king. Among the king's champions there is no one except you whom I would have permitted to call me out as you have done. Anyone else except for the king himself I would have killed. Now events will run their course, turning out as they will, and no action on our part will affect the outcome. In truth, I can tell you that in many ways I can now offer the king far less support than before you woke me." Hjalti responded, "It is clear that my concern is for you and King Hrolf, yet it is difficult to make the right decision when events develop as they have." After Hjalti's challenge, Bodvar stood up and went out to battle. The bear was gone from King Hrolf's force, and now the battle began to turn against the king. Queen Skuld, from where she sat in her black tent on the witch's scaffold, had been unable to work any magic while the bear was in King Hrolf's ranks. The situation then changed as much as when dark night follows a bright day. King Hrolf's men now saw a hideous boar advancing from King Hjorvard's force. In size, it appeared to be no smaller than a 3-year-old bull. Its color was wolf gray. An arrow shot out from each of its bristles, and in a monstrous way it mowed down King Hrolf's retainers in droves. Hewing with both hands, Bodvar Bjarki moved forcefully around. He thought of nothing else but to cause as much damage as possible before he fell. Men fell dead across each other in front of him, until both his shoulders were covered in blood. Corpses were heaped high all around him, and he behaved as overcome with madness. However many of Hjorvard's and Skuld's men he and Hrolf's champions killed, their enemies' ranks remarkably never diminished. It was as though Hrolf's men were having no effect, and they thought they had never come upon so strange an occurrence. Bodvar said, "Deep are the ranks of Skuld's army. I suspect that the dead are wandering about. They rise up again to fight us, and it becomes difficult to fight with ghosts. As many limbs as we cleave, shields and splits, helmets and mail coats we hew apart, and war leaders we cut down, the encounters with the dead are the grimmest. We lack the strength to combat such opponents. But where is that champion of King Hrolf who most questioned my courage, and until I answered him, repeatedly challenged me to enter the fight? I do not see him now, and it is not often I criticize others." Then Hjalti said, "You speak truthfully, and you are not a man to slander others. Here stands the man named Hjalti, but I have some work to do. There is not much distance between us, and I could use the support of good men, foster brother, because all my armor has been hacked off me. Even though I believe that I am fighting to my limit, I am no longer able to avenge all the blows I've received. But now we must hold nothing back if we are to be guests this evening in Valhalla. Certainly, we have never come up against a marvel such as we now face, although we have long been forewarned about the events now occurring." Bodvar said, "Listen to my words. I have fought in 12 pitched battles. Always I have been called fearless and have never given way to a berserker. It was I who encouraged King Hrolf to seek out King Adils in his home. We were met with deceit, but that was nothing compared to this foulness. My heart is now so gripped by the events that my eagerness to continue the fight is diminished. A short while ago, in the earlier clash, I was up against King Hjorvard. We were face to face, and neither of us threw insults at each other, although we exchanged blows for a time. He gave me a blow that I found heavy, while I, for my part, hacked off a hand and a foot. I landed another blow on his shoulder, slicing him down the side, for the length to his spine. His reaction was not even to sigh. It was as if he dozed for a time, and I thought him dead. Few men like him are to be found, for he fought afterward no less boldly than before, and I cannot say what it is driving him. Assembled here against us are men, rich and powerful, pouring in from all directions, so that there is no defense. I do not recognize Odin among them, although I strongly suspect that this foul and unfaithful son of the evil one will be hovering in the background and causing us harm. If someone would only point him out to me, I would squeeze him like the detestable puny mouse. That vile, poisonous creature would be shamelessly treated if I could just get my hands on him. Who would not have bitterness in his heart if he saw his liege lord as ill-treated as we now see ours?" Hjalti answered, "It is not possible to bend fate, nor can one stand against nature." At this point, they ceased their talk. All right. So the great battle is waging, and it was going good until it went bad. So what happens here? We go back to the beginning, and we see that Hrolf, Bodvar, and the other 12 champions, they ride out of the hall, and they're like, all right, let's do this. It's game on. Let's kick ass and take names. And they do. And pretty cool things happen, right? These guys are just slicing and hacking and hewing and stomping and stabbing and just dropping Hjorvard and Skuld's army by the score. And an interesting sight is seen next to King Hrolf is this bear, this battle bear, right? This little battle bear. Going back to the origin of Bodvar, is it so weird that we now see King Hrolf is waging war against this army outside his fortress, and now this battle bear is by his side? And according to the account, the bear is just swiping at men and taking 5 down at a time and ripping them up with his teeth, and just like really like waging war almost as if the bear is winning it on its own. And the tide seems to be flowing in King Hrolf's favor. And Hjalti, again, Screech, as we said from part 1, who at that time was hot, he's like, well, where's Bodvar? He should be out here helping too, because he's the greatest of the champions, yet he's nowhere to be found. I'm going to run back inside and see if I can find him. And he finds Bodvar. And he wakes Bodvar, right? It's almost as though he pulls Bodvar out of a state of deep meditation. And he says, hey, Bodvar, like, what's the deal? You're supposed to be out there helping us, and, you're in here just taking a nap or whatever. Like, what's the story? And Bodvar just looks at Hjalti and he says, you know what, if only you, Screech, only you. Only you would be here disturbing me right now at this crucial moment. I've been through, 12 pitched battles. He goes through his whole, veteran's account, and he says, now you've awakened me, and I will put on my gear and go out and wage war with King Hrolf and join you. And we're just going to have to see how things go now. I think now, like, whatever fate has in store for us is going to happen. And wouldn't you know it, they join Hrolf outside in battle. The bear is now gone. Bodvar Bjarki is there, Hjalti's there, and they start cutting back into King Hjorvard and Queen Skuld's army. And then what happens after that? Well, now Queen Skuld, who is a sorceress, conjures a boar in a similar way that King Adils, who was a pagan sacrificer, conjured a boar in the last part we read in part 3. But this boar is different. This thing can shoot arrows out of its bristles. It has like a machine gun attached to its face, and it's shooting arrows out of its face through these bristles, and it's just cutting down King Hrolf's men. And it's like, well, we can't stand up against the boar with the machine gun face. It's like, what else is going on? It's like, well, it gets worse. It seems that every time we cut down these soldiers in Queen Skuld and King Hjorvard's army, they resurrect. So she's essentially a necromancer as well. When the men are cut down, they're resurrected as zombies, like they're zombie Vikings, right? How crazy would that look? This field of zombie Vikings. And Bodvar himself says he encountered King Hjorvard on the battlefield. And King Hjorvard was striking him, and Bodvar was striking King Hjorvard. He hacked off Hjorvard's arm or hand and cut off a foot, and literally sliced him down to his spine. And then he said it looked as though King Hjorvard dozed for a second and then woke back up and basically sighed and went back to fighting just as fiercely as he had been before. He'd never seen anything like it. So they're facing not only a boar that shoots arrows, but a sorceress and a zombie Viking army that seems to have no end. Pretty bad day, right? Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the conclusion. The death of King Hrolf Kraki. And we go to page 77. And we conclude. King Hrolf defended himself well, fighting resolutely and with more courage than has been told of any man. He was attacked relentlessly, and a select company of King Hjorvard and Skuld's warriors formed a ring around him. Skuld now entered the fray. She fiercely incited her rabble to attack King Hrolf because she saw that the champions were no longer close beside him. Bodvar Bjarki sorely grieved that he was unable to assist his lord. The other champions felt the same regret. All of them were now willing to die with King Hrolf as they had been to live with him, when they were in the full vigor of their youth. But now, as all the king's bodyguards had fallen, not one of them was left standing, and most of the champions were mortally wounded. And events turned out as expected, said Master Glaterus. Human strength cannot withstand such fiendish power, unless the strength of God is employed against it. That alone stood between you and victory, King Hrolf, said the Master. You had no knowledge of your Creator. Such a storm of enchantments now descended upon them that the champions began to fall, one across the other. King Hrolf managed to emerge from behind the shield wall, but he was nearly dead from exhaustion. There is no need to draw out the tale. King Hrolf fell gloriously together with his champions. They made no such of a slaughter there that the words alone were inadequate to describe it. King Hjorvard and his army fell, save only a few shirkers who, together with Skuld, were still on their feet. Skuld took all of King Hrolf's realm under her power, but she ruled poorly and for only a short time. Frodi set out to avenge his brother Bodvar Bjarki as he promised to do so. He was joined by King Thorir Houndsfoot, and it is told Frodi's tale. The brothers were supported by a strong contingent sent from the Swedish kingdom by Queen Yrsa, and men say that Vog served as their commander. All these forces sailed for Denmark, and Skuld was taken by surprise. They seized and held her in such a way that she was prevented from working any witchcraft. They killed all of her rabble and tortured her in different ways. The kingdoms returned to the rule of King Hrolf's daughters. When all this had accomplished, everyone went home. A burial mound was raised for King Hrolf, and the sword Skofnung was laid in the mound with him. A mound was raised for each of the champions, and they likewise were buried with their weapons. And here ends the saga of King Hrolf Kraki and his champions. The end. Okay, so yeah, King Hrolf, he dies in the end, right? And as we mentioned in part 3, it's suspected that Hrani, the old farmer who they encountered on their way back from Sweden after defeating King Adol's, was in fact the one-eyed Allfather, Odin. And Hrolf insulted him by refusing his gifts of armor and weapons. And that it's suspected that once this insult had been given to Odin, Odin had decided that, well, Hrolf, this is where your story will end. By insulting the father of the gods, you've lived a long enough in life. You've been a great king. You've raised a court full of champions, the likes of which will live on in memory. So perhaps this is where your story will end, and this is where it ends. Queen Skuld survives, and Hrolf and his men are cut down. This individual, Master Glaterus, I have no idea who that's supposed to be referring to, but it almost sounds like he's narrating here, and he's telling this story after the fact that because Hrolf had not known his creator, God the Father, and had worshipped the gods of old perhaps, or found worship in himself, in his own vanity, that this is what doomed him. It's anyone's guess. Perhaps this last lesson, this death of King Hrolf, was meant to be a lesson to the Norse that finding God the Father, the Creator, would save you from such a fate as that suffered by King Hrolf, although he died a champion's death, as did his champions. And that all of the people that you have met in the saga, Frodi, Vog, Thorir, Queen Yrsa, they came and avenged the people who they pledged loyalty to, whether it be Hrolf or Svipdag or Bodvar Bjarki. Right. And Hrolf was given a proper burial mound, which was the custom in this pre-Viking age, and was buried with his sword. So yeah, thus ends the tale of King Hrolf Kraki and his champions. Okay, cool. I hope you enjoyed this saga for King Hrolf and his champions. It's one of those stories, I think, that is interesting in and of itself, but you can't help but notice the similarities that the author, whoever that person or people may have been, they try to insert the Anglo-Saxon myths of Beowulf, and you have the Norse mythology, obviously, which is the foundation of it. And as Christianity was making its way north into the northern lands of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, etc., you can tell that the author, right, like Snorri Sturluson, was trying to persuade the Norse population through these fantastic stories and myths more towards a monotheistic religion such as Christianity. And this is definitely what the Saga of Hrolf Kraki was trying to do. Okay, this concludes the Saga of Hrolf Kraki. We will pick up next time and we will read the Saga of the Volsungs, and that's my favorite. And the Saga of the Volsungs follows the heroic epic story of Sigurd, or in the German Siegfried, which just means the champion one, the glorious one. He is essentially the Achilles of the Norse world. He's the greatest of champions. You cannot reference heroic Norse literature without making reference to Siegfried. Okay, yes, all right, cool. I hope you've enjoyed this series so far. Stick around for the Volsungs. I'm going to pick that up hopefully in the next day or two. But yeah, thanks again. This has been the Hoplite channel. If you're liking it, give it a thumbs up. If you really like the channel, go ahead and subscribe or share it with friends and family if you think they would enjoy this material. And till next time, take it easy.